all too often in the things that we try to do, we make mistakes about which examples we choose to highlight. And I wanted to use this one because it's an important message that gets lost in the details of the actual example he chooses to use to substantiate it. Now, President Nelson is dead, so I wish I'd noticed this when he was still alive to bring it up, because I think he might have actually corrected this if he was still alive to do so. So this is from an address he gave in April Conference 2018, shortly after he became the prophet. And in this talk, which you can see here, Ministering with the Power and Authority of God, he makes the highlighted contention that through a lifetime of service in this church, I have learned that it really doesn't matter where one serves. What the Lord cares about is how one serves. And I believe this is a true statement. The trouble is the example he uses to corroborate this claim. So he goes on to talk about some of his experiences. And his concerns about what we're allowed to do. There's a really good section here about not using the priesthood correctly, and instead of giving a blessing, giving a prayer, which you should read. And then he gets down into the example that he uses. Here we go, in Boston. Okay, so he visits with a man named Brother Cox and discusses in this talk the efforts that he went through to bring Brother Cox back to activity. And then, cigar, radio equipment, good stuff, no problem. Local leaders continued to nurture the Cox family. And then he goes back 8 years, and who's the first stake president? Brother Cox, who then goes on to become, the new stake patriarch. And then it doesn't end there. His huge family. And he was also stake patriarch. Okay, stake president. Oh, yeah, I missed it. Also, a mission president and a temple president. This is not an example of how you serve matters. This is actually an example of where you serve. He chose as his example, inarticulately, someone who rose to high and lofty status in the church. Very few people become stake presidents, stake patriarchs, mission presidents, and temple presidents. He did not pick somebody who became a faithful Sunday school teacher, home teacher, elders quorum secretary, Sunday school president, ward mission leader. He chose someone who also rose in might. And then this, of course, he can't leave out the ginormous family. The issue I have with this is it begs the question about what about people who don't have any posterity? What about people who, because they were cigar-smoking members who were inactive, who come back and don't become anything? There are tons and tons of good and faithful members who never become anything, and yet Brother Cox, no dig on him, don't know him, is chosen not because of how he served. There's no discussion in here about what he did in any of these callings that made him such a great man, but the example he gives is about where he served. This is the problem. I know this is supposed to be an uplifting example. He does not, however, talk about the great things he did to nurture scouts in the scouting program or youth to get involved in their communities and serve. He doesn't talk about great lessons that were given or people who were cared for, service projects that were organized. He talks about the titles that this man had and his great posterity. So if you're a person who has never been who is a never was, and has never been a president, if you're a person who doesn't have any posterity, what do you conclude from this, and what do you take from this? That even the prophet says, in the example that he gives, that it is where you serve and not how, because there is no mention in here about how Brother Cox served, only where. We have to be very careful sometimes, even as lofty and experienced leaders, about the examples that we choose to use to hold up as a light to others and inspire them. Because this is debilitating and demoralizing if you have eyes to see and ears to hear. because the example does not corroborate the original assertion. Let's go back and remind you. I have learned that it really doesn't matter where one serves, the Lord cares about how one serves. It really doesn't matter about this if you don't talk about how one serves and you mention only the callings that one has, because people will then conclude that unless you become something, you don't matter to the Lord. I don't think that's what he was trying to get at here, but it is definitely a message that could be taken by people who have not had those lofty titles like he has and like Brother Cox. I want to leave you with this. I believe this part of President Nelson's talk is 100% true. But I don't think the Lord really cares about what you did. I think he cares about how you served his children. And you can be a terrible stake president and not be as good as a faithful and loving father. That you can be a terrible father and not be as good as a faithful youth Sunday school teacher or scoutmaster. That those things matter more to the Lord than the titles that you hold and the positions to which you attain. Because remember, who he chose as his disciples. They were not the learned, they are not usually the rich, they are those who are willing to go and follow him. And I believe this is the truth here. I just don't like the example. There are plenty of other examples he could have chosen. I will leave you with one of mine. I'm going to mention him by name because I respect this man that much. When I was a youth, one of the youth advisors, and he wasn't mine, was a man named Bob Kennedy. And Bob Kennedy was, well, he would be described as slovenly dressed. He was never a man of much means or substance. He never had any of those lofty titles. But he was heavily engaged in the effort to help raise up young boys to become men. And I respect him for the lessons that he taught and the efforts that he made trying to help us to become not just older men, but better men. I know Bob Kennedy's son. He attends church in the same building as I do in a different congregation. And I've told Bob's son that I respected his father because he was a influential figure in my life who, even though he was never a stake president, mission president, temple president, or stake patriarch, he was a man who cared about those entrusted to his care. And that is the one I would have highlighted. I don't know Brother Cox. I don't have anything against him. But I love Bob Kennedy. And if I get to see him again, that would be a good thing. Anyway, be very careful about the examples that you pick because they may not be the great examples that you think they are. Godspeed and take care.